Happy Tuesday, readers. Welcome to the Reid Report. I'm Joy Reid. And topping our agenda, President Obama is overseas and he's firing back at those here at home who are criticizing the Bergdahl prisoner swap.
Regardless of the circumstances, whatever those circumstances may turn out to be, we still get an American soldier back if he's held in captivity. Period. Full stop. We don't condition that.
Was Bergdahl a hero or a deserter? The Army launches a full-scale inquiry to find out, while fellow soldiers who served with the Army sergeant are speaking out.
He is not a hero.
We were all in it together over there, and he broke that bond by leaving us.
He willfully left.
He became very disillusioned with what actual combat was.
He deserted not only the Army, but he also left myself and my platoon and my company to clean up his mess.
Plus, it's primary day. Voters in 8 states are headed to the polls. But if you follow the money, the biggest story today might be the mountain of cash descending on the races from outside spending groups. We'll discuss as we go Dateline, Mississippi. But let's start with developing news on the future of the freed POW, U.S. Army Sergeant Bergdahl, and continuing accusations of desertion. NBC News has learned the U.S. Army is preparing to launch a full-scale, high-level inquiry into the circumstances and personal conduct of Sergeant Bergdahl and his disappearance from his outpost in Afghanistan and his subsequent capture by the Taliban. In a Facebook post today, Army General and Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, Martin Dempsey, responded to questions about Bergdahl's conduct, saying, "As for the circumstances of his capture, when he's able to provide them, we'll learn the facts. Like any American, he's innocent until proven guilty. Our Army's leaders will not look away from misconduct if it occurred." NBC News has also learned the Army is looking into whether the deaths of 6 soldiers were related to the search for Sergeant Bergdahl. The possibility that these deaths could have been prevented has a number of Bergdahl's former platoon mates and others inside the military lashing out against his release. As Brett Stevens writes in the Wall Street Journal, quote, "I spoke with a highly decorated former Special Forces operator and asked what he thought about Bergdahl. The former operator suggested a firing squad might be appropriate." NBC's Jim Miklashevsky is live at the Pentagon with more details. So, Mick, what will this inquiry likely look like, and how possible is it to determine whether those 6 soldiers that died trying to search for Bergdahl?
Well, shortly after Bergdahl disappeared from his base, his fellow soldiers said he simply got up and walked off the base voluntarily. The Army did conduct an investigation of sorts that is classified, but reportedly in that case, they found or determined that Bergdahl did in fact leave voluntarily. But, you know, now they're looking at an entirely different circumstance because they will have more information at hand, because they'll have an opportunity at some point, if he chooses, to talk to Bergdahl himself to see just what was he thinking at that time, and if in fact he did voluntarily walk off the base, and how he was taken into custody and captured by the Taliban. So it's very squishy ground right now. Everybody wants firm answers about just how this procedure is going to be carried out. But we're told here at the Pentagon that the primary objective right now for the military is to get Bergdahl up to full speed, in full good health, and back home in the States to meet with his parents. I talked to one military law expert who say what everybody has to do right now is cool down a little bit once Bergdahl gets home, and then have a very systematic, thorough investigation into exactly what did happen here.
Yeah, that sounds pretty rational. Thanks so much, Jim Miklashevsky. Appreciate it.
You bet.
And let's go now to NBC's Richard Engel, who's live in Landstuhl, Germany. And so, Richard, Reuters is reporting today that the senior members of the Taliban who were released from Gitmo in exchange for Sergeant Bergdahl actually kind of have more freedom than we actually thought. We thought they'd be in home confinement. Is that report accurate?
No, I don't think it's fully accurate, and I think a lot of it is based on the assumption that they would be on home confinement. The Qataris said that they would be under surveillance and that their travel would be limited. And the Qataris today told NBC News that they will be under surveillance, that they have no intention of allowing these members of the Taliban to join the Taliban again, to engage in political activity, or to present a threat to Qatar or to the United States. So I think it was a question of perception. If people thought that they would be heading back into some sort of custody, the Qataris were saying, no, they're not going back into custody. They're not going to be wearing any ankle bracelets or anything like that, but they will be watched. And this is a small country. Qatar is a very small country. CENTCOM is based there. If you want to keep tabs on people, it's not the hardest place in the world to do it.
Real quick, Richard, because, you know, obviously the U.S. trusted the Qataris enough to broker this deal in the first place. How close, you just mentioned CENTCOM being there. I'm assuming that means that security cooperation is very close between the United States and Qatar, number one, and that, as you said, they would have some interest in keeping tabs on these guys for their own security.
It's very hard to determine Qatar's foreign policy. They seem to have multiple, often overlapping, sometimes conflicting allies and interests. Yes, CENTCOM has been based there. Yes, they have very close relations with the United States, but at times they've also been very close to Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, even Hezbollah. They are a bit of a black sheep in the Gulf. They are not popular with the leadership in the United Arab Emirates, not popular with the Saudis, not popular with the Egyptians at all. So they have a very complex foreign policy, but no one suggests, or no one that we've spoken to suggests that they want militant groups operating on their soil that could potentially become a threat to Qatar or the United States.
Yes, indeed. It just gets more complicated the more you dig into it. NBC's Richard Engel, thank you very much. Appreciate it. And NBC's Kelly O'Donnell has just wrapped up a briefing with House Speaker John Boehner and why he believes the White House did not follow the rules on that prisoner exchange. So, Kelly, what did you hear from Speaker Boehner?
Well, let me clarify. Speaker Boehner was not a part of this briefing. This was a briefing with a small group of reporters and GOP aides. So that's an important distinction. There is now a public statement from John Boehner that is on the record raising questions about how this prisoner swap took place. There's a lot of dense new information coming through. I'm going to give you some of the headlines from this, Joyanne. What we have learned is that Congress was briefed in a very select way in November of 2011 and again in January of 2012. When I say a select way, I'm talking about the Speaker and the key chairmen of committees, Armed Services, Intelligence, told about the possibility of a swap with Bo Bergdahl and some not entirely identified detainees from the Taliban. Conversations took place at that time. Serious questions, I'm told, were raised from members of Congress about things like, were all other options exhausted? What was the risk of doing something like this? What threats could still take place for American personnel? Lots of serious questions that were raised. What followed were letters written by members of Congress to the administration. I'm told Secretary Clinton at that time responded back in a letter, and that letter is classified. What we were told is that at the end of those conversations, that members of Congress were assured that no further discussion would take place without being notified. They were told at the time, they say, that the sort of situational opportunities for an exchange had diminished. In effect, the opportunity to swap Bergdahl for the Taliban had somehow been sidelined because of other conditions. The purpose, they had been told, was to try to create a spirit of reconciliation, to try to help wind down the war in Afghanistan. So did Congress have some knowledge of this? Yes, according to senior officials who are telling us they had been told about the idea of it. The real fight that is ahead now, Joyanne, will be about what does it mean for notification. I'm told that Speaker Boehner was not personally notified, that an aide to the Speaker was phoned at 11:52 a.m. Saturday morning after the operation had taken place. The Speaker himself was not notified by the administration. And about a half hour or so later, a public statement from the President came out. There are strong concerns on the part of members of Congress and the senior leadership about the process of notifying Congress. This will be waged in hearings coming forward. There will be a lot of discussion. But the issue that really Congress is trying to say through House GOP aides is that while there was some knowledge of the potential that there were a lot of serious questions raised, and there were assurances from the White House, they say, that the law would be followed in terms of notification, and they believe that did not occur. Joyanne?
Thanks very much. Lots of great information. NBC's Kelly O'Donnell. Really appreciate it. And I'd like to bring in Democratic Senator Bill Nelson of Florida. He's a senior member of the Senate Armed Services Committee. And Senator, I hope you got a chance to listen to what Kelly O'Donnell was just saying about the whole process of trying to secure the release of now Sergeant Bo Bergdahl that date back to November of 2011, going into January of 2012, when there were some briefings to select members on the Hill. Can I ask you first, have you ever had a briefing about this situation as a member of the Senate Armed Services Committee?
No, and I can tell you there are other leaders of other committees that feel like that they were not briefed, but recognize that the president, in signing one of these pieces of legislation into law, issued a signing statement that in effect said that he reserved the right to act quickly in the interest of the country. So when it gets right down to it, I don't think any law was broken. The question is, should Congress have been notified simply because of the relations between the legislative and executive branch? That's a different question. And a lot of people here, Democrats as well, that feel that it should.
Well, the question then, sir, if in fact notification had been made, let's say, given the fact you've already got members of the opposition party, particularly, who oppose this deal on its face, what might have been the process had such a notification taken place if you believe the administration's formulation, which is that time was of the essence because of this young man's health or safety? Would that have just drawn things out for what, weeks, months, days? What do you anticipate?
I think there are times that the president's going to have to act without notification, and I think this is really much to do about nothing with regard to the notification. Now, I think the questions, as Jim Miklashevsky said, there are a lot of facts that we don't know. He used the word squishy. And, for example, we're going to have to not prejudge, but if, in fact, this young soldier, then a private, walked off his duty, in effect abandoning his post, in effect deserting, then that puts a different light on a trade of 1 for 5. But we don't know those circumstances. We don't know, for example, what was his mental state, his condition at the time that he left his unit. These are things that we're going to have to find out in the future.
Well, sir, you know, you yourself were served on active duty for a time in the Army National Guard during the Vietnam era. In your opinion, if, let's say, this young man walked off of his base and then was subsequently captured, I think there's a fine line, I guess, between deserting, actually trying to run off and maybe join the other side or do something nefarious, but walked off the base and got captured, are you saying that that reduces the, I guess, the burden on the United States to bring him back? Would you then oppose, if those facts were true, if he just walked off the base willingly, would you then oppose an operation or a swap to get him back?
My personal preference, it puts a whole different light on it if that's what occurred.
But puts a different light on it, meaning you wouldn't do it?
You've got to remember what General Dempsey said today. He says the policy of our military is you go and get an American regardless, and then you determine what the facts are. Now, that's what the administration did.
And, sir, but you're saying that it would have put a different line on it, meaning that you might have opposed doing it at all. You might have preferred to leave him there if the facts turned out that he just walked off of the base.
Remember, I said I'm not prejudging, but to answer your question, if he did desert, then I think there's a real question of whether you would go in and trade 1 for 5.
Senator Bill Nelson, thank you very much for your time, sir.
Thank you.
All right, up next, Gitmo is now 5 prisoners lighter. We'll discuss how the Bo Bergdahl story is reigniting the push to close the U.S. prison camp at Guantanamo Bay. Then I'll tell you about the gun guys who are so extreme, even the NRA wants them to cool it.